Presidential campaign debates were invented by and for TV. 1960 wasn't just the first televised presidential debate, it was the first. George Washington never debated. Abraham Lincoln famously participated in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but that was in a Senate campaign that Abraham Lincoln lost. We had 34 presidents in a row who never debated to get the job. If you're around 70 years old, you can actually remember seeing every presidential debate in history. That's how few there have been. You could have seen every one of them, and not one of those debates has actually been a test of anything presidential except demeanor. And the only presidential campaign debater in history who has failed the basic demeanor test is Donald Trump. The debate rules are always absurd and test nothing about the job of the presidency. The rules tomorrow night are typical. They say, quote, "The debate will begin with a question, with candidates each allotted 2 minutes to respond. This will be followed by 1-minute rebuttals and responses to the rebuttals." In the job of the presidency, the president is never forced to give 2-minute replies or 60-second replies about anything, ever. There's an especially ridiculous rule for tomorrow night's commercial breaks. There will be 2 commercial breaks, and the rule says campaign staff may not interact with their candidate during that time. That could not be more childish and unrealistic. Presidents always can confer, not just with their staffs and the cabinet, but with the very best experts in the world on every subject at any time, for as long as they want. A better way to do this tomorrow night would actually be to allow the candidates to have as many staff as they want join them on the stage throughout the debate and make sure that all of them have microphones. And the candidates should be allowed to turn to their staffs and confer with them about anything at any time in the debate. And we should be able to hear everything they say, so we can hear if the candidate has competent or incompetent staff. We could hear the candidate overrule some advisors and say something else. We could watch the candidates actually think and process information, including possibly information that they might not know until a staff member tells them or reminds them. A candidate should be allowed to let staff members actually answer questions for them, just as the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, answers questions on behalf of the president around the world, as has every Secretary of State in history. That's the way the presidency actually works. The presidency does not involve oral exams and memory quizzes. The president is allowed to forget what the marginal income tax rate is on couples filing jointly with an income of $150,000. There's always someone in the room who knows the answer to that kind of thing, which, by the way, is 22%. And I don't know that because I used to write tax law and I memorized all the tax brackets. I know that because I just looked it up. That's the way governing works. People are allowed to look up whatever fact they need whenever they need it, and they're allowed to forget those facts when they don't need it, because they'll always be able to retrieve those facts one way or another when they do need it. Or they should always be allowed to ask nearby experts or advisors for that fact. That's the way it works. That's the way it works for senators. That's the way it works for presidents, members of Congress, mayors, city councilors. Faithful viewers of this program with good memories might remember me issuing a version of this complaint about presidential debates and how absurdly unrealistic they are, how they have nothing to do with the job, because I have issued a version of this complaint about the debates every 4 years at least. What we will see in tomorrow night's debate is yet another example of just how unfit for the presidency Donald Trump is. Donald Trump will lie, and we know that he will lie because we know that he will speak and it is impossible for him to do one without the other. There's a new rule in tomorrow night's debate, which hasn't been tried before. Quote, microphones will be muted throughout the debate, except for the candidate whose turn it is to speak. That should be called the Trump rule. That rule was obviously written to try to keep Donald Trump under the kind of control that all presidential debaters before him have been capable of imposing on themselves. Tomorrow night's debate audience could be the biggest television audience that the candidates have this year. And on the eve of the debate, former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who served on the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, for the first time in his life, endorsed the Democrat for president.
I'm Adam Kinzinger, and I'm a proud conservative. I always have been. As a proud conservative, I've always put democracy and our Constitution above all else. And it's because of my unwavering support for democracy that today, as a proud conservative, I'm endorsing Joe Biden for re-election. My entire life has been guided by the conviction that America is a beacon of freedom, liberty, and democracy. So while I certainly don't agree with President Biden on everything, and I never thought I'd be endorsing a Democrat for president, I know that he will always protect the very thing that makes America the best country in the world: our democracy. Donald Trump poses a direct threat to every fundamental American value. He doesn't care about our country. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about himself, and he'll hurt anyone or anything in pursuit of power. We saw that when he tried to overturn an election that he knew he lost in 2020. He attacked the foundation of this nation, encouraging a violent mob of his supporters to march on the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transition of power. Now he's become even more dangerous. He's called for termination of the Constitution. He wants to be a dictator on day one. He actually said that. And he's continuing to stoke the flames of political violence. There's too much at stake to sit on the sidelines. So to every American of every political party, and those of none, I say now is not the time to watch quietly as Donald Trump threatens the future of America. Now's the time to unite behind Joe Biden and show Donald Trump off the stage once and for all.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.